Well, hello everybody. Welcome back. I love all the stuff that we're learning, but I'm also excited about all the tools we get to play with. This is so great. Our next presentation, Bootiful Spring Tooling for the Masses, is one I've been waiting for. It's going to be presented to you by Hadi Hariri, Sandra Algrim, and Martin Lippert. Martin, would you take it away?
Yeah, it's my pleasure to kick off this awesome talk. So welcome to our beautiful spring tooling for the masses. We know you love your tools, and our goal is to make you more productive using these tools of your choice, basically, when you hack Spring applications using Spring Boot, Spring Framework, all the Spring projects, and all that good stuff. So since we don't really want to convince you to use a specific tool, we really want you to be most productive or the most productive as possible, using the tool that you're already using. And therefore, we have a choice of basically 3 tools. And that's why we have three presenters on this talk. So we will take a look and give you an intro about how to do Springy app development using Eclipse and the Spring Tool Suite, VS Code, and IntelliJ IDEA. So whatever you prefer of those 3 tools, this is the talk for you. You will get deep insights into how to do Spring app development using these tools. So we will walk through all of them, switch between us, and show you some goodness. We will not show everything in every tool because otherwise we would repeat ourselves all the time. But you will, I think, get a great overview about what is included in all those tools, how to get started, how to code, how to learn, how to deploy things in all the different environments. And with that, I would like to hand it over to Sandra to kick it off and get started using Spring Boot development in VS Code. Sandra.
Thanks, Martin. Welcome, everyone. So I'm here working as a developer advocate for Microsoft, so for all Java developers, basically. And I'm very happy that I'm the one who's presenting VS Code. So for our end-to-end scenario we would want to present, we will always start with a new project. So I'm here in a totally empty repository, and I will just open up my Visual Studio Code from here. Okay, there we go. You should see my screen. And here's my empty repository. And what I'm using is the Spring Boot extension package. So make sure you have that installed. And if you have installed this one, you are able to see a welcome screen where you can actually create a new VS Code, a new Spring Boot project. So I will go here and create a new Spring Boot project. I will choose the specific Spring Boot version, and why don't we stick with the latest and greatest stable version? And we will go with Java. I will just go with the COM example, call it hello, and use the packaging as jar. Java 11 is fine. And I'm going with my extensions. And as you can see, I can also use the last use tab, or I search for each of them by hand. And I'm using here the Spring Web and also the Spring Actuator for better monitoring and also for, to simply better go with my app and see what's happening here. So I can just generate this into this folder, and then I quickly add that to my workspace. And so I'm able to see here my Hello application I've just created, my source folder, even with some tests, and here's my Hello application. I can run this from here, or I go and create maybe a simple controller as well, right? So let's go with the Hello World controller. Yes, I got a class, and I'm using the REST controller. I feel that some things are still loading in the background. Let's see. So REST controller. Yep. And it's importing automatically for me what I want to use. And I'm also using the class, the get mapping. And here I'm getting the whole, so everything is filled out for me, and I can now just quickly add some data here. So just give it the return type Spring, call it get hello world or hello Spring. Yeah, Martin, what do you think? Should we call it hello world or better hello Spring 1?
Of course, hello Spring 1, but make it a string and not a spring.
Yeah, totally. Thanks. Okay, let's remove all the unnecessary imports and let's just run the application. So now Spring is starting and I can actually go on localhost 8080. So, yep. Localhost 8080, and here you can see I'm there with my, as expected, I don't know, but you can see I opened that up here, so that's fine, that's working. So we're going to showcase even more outline metadata and other things like the Spring Boot dashboard in a bit, but I think we should go with a bit more complicated project. What about the all famous pet clinic application? Martin, do you want to give it a try and load the pet clinic for us?
Of course, I love Pet Clinic. So this is jumping over to the Eclipse version of the Spring tooling, the Spring tools for Eclipse distribution, having Pet Clinic imported already. So of course, I don't know anything about Pet Clinic. So Hardy will show us more details about Pet Clinic in a second, but something that Sandra showed us is the integration with the start.spring.io starter to get projects created. But usually when you do that, you select a few dependencies, but they will change over time. So most likely you will like to add additional dependencies over time. And what people usually then do is, funnily, they go back to start.spring.io, they create a project with this additional dependency, they browse the code, and then they kind of copy paste the necessary bits and pieces over into the existing project. And to make that easier, there's a nice little wizard that I would like to show where you can add additional dependencies to an existing, more complicated project. So it gives you kind of the same choice as VS Code would do, as start.spring.io would do. In this case, let me select Azure support. I could search for other stuff here and see all the goodness from start.spring.io, but let's stay with the Azure one in this case, for example. And as a result, I basically get support for what I would do manually, like, oh, take a look at the code, what would be generated, and copy paste things over into my project, but more automated and in a nicer way. Because here I see on the left side what start.spring.io would generate for this project, like a POM file with these ingredients. And on the right side, I see what is in my project, in my workspace. So I can just say, okay, please use all these changes and put them into the right place, like a new property in the properties section, a new dependency in the dependencies section, and so on, which is quite nice. So let's just check it off. Another thing is that if you create a new project on start.spring.io, there might be other files being created for you as well. Like, for example, a help file, properties and an application of properties file, things like that. So this wizard will tell you that as well. And in this case, I don't have a help file in my project, so I can easily take a look at what would be generated and say, yeah, give me that as well, because there are interesting links. I can just finish that and get all these things automatically included in my project. So it is a lot easier and provides more feedback and more details than to just do that manually yourself to add additional properties. So that's kind of just a quick walkthrough about how you can add dependencies to existing projects, kind of benefiting from the start.spring.io experience. And to learn more about what is this project all about and what is all included and what are all my Spring elements in this project, I would like to hand it over to Hadi to show us how he would learn about this project and kind of navigate and think about what's all included in IntelliJ IDEA. Hadi, take it from here.
Thank you, Martin. Yeah, so we're going to start. We're going to open up the project pet clinic, and I have no idea how it works. I don't know anything about it. So obviously, if you're using IntelliJ, you're familiar with all of the different navigation features that we have, right? So I can, for instance, go to my class owner controller here, and then navigates to anything that uses the owner controller, and so on and so forth. But there's also Spring specific stuff that we have in IntelliJ IDEA. And namely, when I open up an application that is a Spring application, what I want to do is, first of all, go to my entry point, which is my pet clinic application in this case. So it'll be my Spring Boot application. From here, you can see the gutter icons. And these are the important things that you always have to notice in IntelliJ IDEA are the gutter icons, which show you features of Spring support. And I'm going to use the mouse a lot here so that you can see what I'm actually doing. But most of these functionalities you can actually use by the keyboard. So I can say, show me the Spring diagrams. And this would give me kind of an overview of a little bit like, what is this application? How is it all tied in together? But there's other ways to actually explore the application. If you open up the Spring tool window, you can see that we have 3 tabs here, beans, MVC, and data. Now the beans are essentially giving us information about all the classes that we have inside our application. Those that come from Spring, the framework, you're in yellow, and then those that are part of our class, our application, are actually the ones that are highlighted in white. Does that even make sense that it's highlighted in white? Probably not. But anyway, so we have our owner controller, and then inside the owner controller, we can also see everything that is related and how things kind of like go together. So pet type, formatter, etc. But there's more to this. If I click on the data, if you're doing any kind of Spring application, obviously you are well aware of the repository pattern, and you are using interface repository to basically get that CRUD functionality when you want with your database. So here it's very common that in your application you have a bunch of these. And here you can see that I have the vet repository, the pet repository, the owner repository. Clicking on each of this, it gives me the different functions that are available, the different methods that are available for each of these controllers. Now, from there on, we can also go over to MVC. And MVC shows us all of the controllers that we have inside our application. So here, for instance, I have the crash controller, owner controller. And if I click on the owner controller, I can see all of the different entry points that I have in that owner controller. So for instance, let's click on the post. Double clicking on it will take us to the actual code where that is defined. But in this code, we can also see that we have, again, a gutter icon, and we have a world icon. So if we click on navigate to related views, it's going to show me the views that are related to this actual URL resource. If we click on open an HTTP client, that is actually quite useful because it uses the HTTP client tool inside IntelliJ that allows you to, it offers you completion, the ability to run things, etc. But we'll see that in a moment. And last but not least, if I click on the world here and I say, show all endpoints of module, this will give me an overview of all of the different endpoints that my Spring application has. And of course, I can get this with double shift and using the URL here as well. But this gives me a nice tool window of everything. And then if I click on each of these ones, I can see the documentation, I can see the HTTP client request that it would generate, as well as the open API. So this gives me a good overview of my controllers, the endpoints. But we're talking a lot about databases as well. And in any application, again, you're going to probably have your databases. And if you're using IntelliJ IDEA, you're going to have integration with database tools, right? So here you can see that I have my database tool and I have my actual SQL database. I can double click on any of these and I can see all of the data that is being displayed. And then, of course, I can also show the persistence view. So if I open up my window with Shift Command A. Remember that that is the one that you want to go to if you don't know the keyboard combination, Shift Command A. Persistence, that will give me information about the persistence that I have in my application. So here I can see, for instance, owner, click on first name, and it will take me to that code, to that bean that is representing that persistence. And if you are using IntelliJ IDEA and you are using the plugin, which is called JPA Buddy, over here, JPA Buddy, that gives you another interesting and nice tool window by bringing it up by saying JPA structure. And what this gives me is a little bit more information. It actually provides me with information about the base entity that is being used, what is it's referenced by, etc. So all of this allows me to get a good idea of how things all come together in my Spring application. And in a little bit, we'll actually start to see how we can extend this application in IntelliJ IDEA with some coding. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Sarah, who's going to show us the next steps. Sarah?
Yes, I'm Sandra. So I'm back to VS Code. Let me share my screen first. There we go. So here's the pet clinic. I cloned the repository and opened that up in my Visual Studio Code. Yeah, and if I want to see where I am right now, I can also find the main app here, or I press on the outline. That also gives me a nice overview of the use Spring Boot tools, as well as the language and the main application or the main method where I can start. And here I also have my Spring dashboard where I can easily run and debug my Spring Boot application from. I can also dive a little more into the Java project here, but it's actually, and see here the model with the base entities and owner and system. But as you can see, it's either small and probably not the best overview. So, and I can also use the shortcut Command T on my Mac and then search for all request mappings, and like going for owners or go for add, and then have here, for instance, the owners with the owner ID and the edits, or I go and search for the configs with C, or I can also go and search for my beans. What was it? Was it just this one?
The add plus.
Add plus. Plus was it? Yep. Thank you. It's always good to have the expert for Spring tooling with you in such a call, isn't it? So yeah, and here I can see all the beans my Spring Boot application is using, and that's actually very cool. And if I know kind of the name, I can also search for it. So like the pet type format, and it also works with shortcuts. So that's pretty cool. And that helps me a lot to get used to my application. And obviously I can also start running the app from here and then have a look at the logs and everything. So now it's starting the app. I still need to get used when I'm in VS Code and when I'm in code spaces, because it looks so alike. But yeah, the shortcut Command T obviously only works in VS Code, because otherwise you would open up a new tab. Yep, so my app is up and running. So I can also go, I think it was 8080 as well. Let's see. Probably. On localhost 8080 and get the pet clinic application. Find the owners or all owners and vegetarians and see the errors, and also see the errors inside my logs here. Nice and easy, not too much, not too less. I think it's a very good to start off with applications. And obviously, if you have bigger applications and you're more familiar with other tools, you're open to use other tools. Other than that, it's super easy to implement new extensions or to write your own extensions and then embed the tooling that you need. All right. So what if I want to dive even more into loggings and what's actually happening at runtime? Martin, do you have a way how to explore that in Eclipse?
Yeah, we do. So what we saw from Hadi and Sandra is basically static information, right? The information inferred from the source code. So giving you a great overview about what is in your source code. We can do the same similar stuff in Eclipse, for example, using this. It's basically the same that Sandra showed us in VS Code, but in Eclipse. But as you know, Spring Boot is doing stuff at runtime. So when you start up your app, it kind of wires beans together, it creates beans and adds additional stuff. So sometimes there's kind of a mismatch between what you have in mind from your source code versus what is actually happening at runtime. So in order to help you with that, the Spring tools for Eclipse and VS Code, and I think IntelliJ has something similar to that, is showing, when you start up an app, showing you additional information from the running real application and what is happening inside of this running real application. So I started a pet clinic, and what you see here in this case, there are additional highlights appearing in the source code that tells you what goes on with this class or this bean at runtime. So when you hover over this, for example, you will see that, oh, there's a controller. This controller is highlighted. So this bean actually exists at runtime in the pet clinic app that is running. And there are two other beans being injected into this one. So the owner repository and the visit repository in this case. So you can understand what's going on at runtime versus what is in your source code. And you can use that to debug stuff, for example, as well, or to get better understanding about what's going on. In this case, for example, I have my owner controller, and I inject three things in the constructor, kind of an owner repository, visit repository, and something called foo. And what I see here is the two of them are highlighted. So they actually exist. So there is something being injected, and I can see what is being injected at runtime. And I can even jump to where this is being defined in the code. Same for visit repository, but nothing for foo. So it's not highlighted. So it looks like, and I configured it this way, that this is possible actually, otherwise the app would not start. So let me go to foo and see that's a service. So I annotated that with service. It should be just there and it should be just fine. Why is that not being wired? So service is not being highlighted green. That means this bean does not exist at runtime. So it gives you this, even if it's not highlighted, it tells you this bean does not exist. So there's an additional information in that case as well. And in my example, I added a conditional on property here, say, okay, this bean should only be active if a certain property is configured in my environment. So when I hover over this, and the green highlight tells me there is additional information about that, it tells me that this conditional on property did not match the condition because it did not find the property foo.property. So now I get an idea about, okay, foo.property is not defined at runtime. I could dive deeper and try to find out why is that not defined at runtime, maybe look at my properties file and see what's there. And with this additional information, kind of bridge the gap between what is in my source code and what is really happening at runtime in my running application. As soon as I find something like this, I of course want to fix it and want to work on my application and want to add additional stuff to it and to do some more coding and show you how to use IntelliJ. And I hand this over to Hadi in a second to show us more about how we can actually do some coding, get some additional coding assistance and help, content assist, stuff like that. An IntelliJ idea in this case, how we can be really efficient doing coding on Spring Boot applications. So let me stop sharing my screen and hand it back to you, Hadi. Take it from here. So I can see your screen, but I cannot hear you yet.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now I can hear you, Hadi.
Yeah, I was saying that every time I want to share my screen, instead of hitting share screen, I'm so close to hitting leave. And I'm like, I'm like, stop hitting that red button. Like, why do they make it red? Anyway, so what we're going to do is to add some code, right? And a big confession, I am not a Java developer. I do write some Kotlin, but not Java. But the great thing about Spring, which is absolutely awesome, is that you can actually mix and match Java and Kotlin in the same application. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. So I have my Kotlin folder here, and I'm not a big fan of having languages separated by folders and namespaces, but let's just not go there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new Kotlin class, which is a Kotlin bean, and we're going to call it adoption, right? Because we want to talk about adopting new pets, right? We're talking about pets, so let's talk about adoptions. And we're going to add it as an entity, but it's going to inherit from base entity, and we're going to put the entity attribute, and then we're going to put the table, and this table is going to be named adoptions. And you can see that that goes red. Why does it go red? Well, because it's saying this table doesn't exist. So let's go ahead and fix that. If I just open up my database tools, I have an actual script here somewhere in resources, which I think is called adoption SQL. There you go. And I can just hit run on this and say, I want to run all of it. And then essentially, there you go. It's just created the adoption table for me. And if I switch back over to adoption, you can see that that red has gone. And it now allows me to navigate directly to the actual table. So let's go back to our adoption here and let's add something. So we're going to add a column, and we're going to call that column not empty. We're going to say that it's not empty, and it will have a name. And then let's go ahead and duplicate this. Doop, doop. There you go. Oops, not like that, Hadi, not like that. Duplicate. And then we'll say here, this is going to be year of birth. And then my last one is going to be location, right? So now I have my entity. The next thing I want to do is add a repository. So we're going to go and create an adoption repository class. But this is actually an interface. So it would be adoption repository interface. And this is going to be based on adoption of type int, our repository. And let's navigate back to that and hit Alt-Enter to import it. And there we go. Now we'll add our functions, which will be find all. And that's going to return a list of adoption. And then we have find by ID, which is of type int. And that's going to return an adoption. Maybe, maybe not. Okay, so we've got our adoption repository. We've got our adoption. The only thing that's left now is to hook it all together. And we're going to do that with an adoption controller. So new Kotlin class, adoption controller. And this is going to be a REST controller. So go ahead and add that. And then we'll just use, I've got a live template, which actually spits this out. This is all configurable. So I can create these live templates that says, okay, get mapping. In my case, it would be adoption. And then what's the function name? I'm going to call it find all. And it doesn't have any parameters, and it's going to return a list of adoption. And then the code is actually going to be return adoption find all. Okay. Now, that doesn't exist. Alt-Enter. We want to create a parameter, create property adoption as constructor parameter. Is that what we want to do? Yes, I think we should. So why didn't it? Yep. Parameter type is invalid. No, never mind. Okay. Let's just add that. That shouldn't have occurred. But anyway, private val adoption repository. Okay. So now we've got our adoption repository. And let's go ahead and do another get mapping, which in this case is going to be adoption and ID. This one's got a parameter. It's going to be find by ID. The parameter, we're going to have a path variable, obviously, because we need it for what we've just defined of type ID. And then we would be ID of type int. And this one I'm going to do as a single expression function in Kotlin. So essentially, I can just say equals adoption find by ID, passing in the ID. And if you haven't found it, then throw a resource status exception, which is HTTP status not found and record not found. Okay, so we're done. So technically, that should actually work. So if I come over here and I say, run my pet clinic application, I could basically just compile that, run that. And if I haven't done anything wrong, that should all be working. Now, this is a REST controller, so it's got an HTTP endpoint that I want to, I don't want that right now, go away, please. It's launching and I want to test my endpoint. And this is where I was showing you before this navigation feature, which I could basically say Alt-Enter, generate request in HTTP client, and it gives me the completion. I hit Alt-Enter, run it, and there you go, I've got my JSON back. Okay, so that's how I basically add a REST controller into my application. Now, obviously, we want to do a little bit more because we want to also showcase some of the things that, most applications that you're using, you're going to end up with some kind of view. If you're obviously making a thin client, then yes, you're going to use some service client-side functionality. But, good old-fashioned web where you can have your server-side views is actually quite nice as well. So let's go ahead and find the templates folder over here. There we go. And inside there, I'm going to add a new file. Now, I'm going to be a little bit lazy here, and to save time, I'm going to just take owner list, paste it here, and call it API list. There you go, API list, right? So now let's go ahead to this and delete all of this. We don't want this right now. This is all the owner. This is going to be API. And now we're going to get this to show. So we need to create our controller. And I'm going to create a new controller, which is called API controller, right? So that's going to be, again, a class. And that API controller has to be a regular controller in Spring. And I'm going to go ahead and create a data class, which is going to be an API entry, which is the information that we want to display. So this is just going to be essentially, we have this awesome API, and what we want to do is give people information about how to use it. Because even though we've called it a REST controller, it's not really self-documenting, is it? So let's just go ahead and give people some insight into how to use our application. So we go ahead and do that, and then I'm going to do another get mapping. In this case, what I want to do is essentially return API, and this is going to be list API model, which we're going to pass in with a model of type model map, and then we will return a string. Okay, so I've got that, and then essentially I'll do model put, and here we're going to say API entries, and then we'll say I'm going to add a bunch of entries here, which is a list of data that I have previously of this class that I've created. And then I just do return API list. Now, since this already exists, IntelliJ gives me the option to actually navigate to it. So Command B, and I can navigate to it. And here what I'm going to do is essentially spit out my table, and I should now get completion of the data that I'm actually using. So you can see here that I say API, and then I get my category, go down API, I get my description, and API, I get my URL. Okay, and let's just move that up. It's much nicer up there. There you go. And the last thing that I want to do is go over to my layout, because I want to be able to access this. And let's go down to where, for example, I don't know, over here, and let's spit out our menu item over there, reformat the code, and there it's now showing our API. So if we run this application now, we should be able to actually see our new entry in our browser, and then see some of the API documentation with the form that we just created. So localhost 8080, and there we go, API docs. And there, I don't know why I had that twice, but anyway, API docs, adoption, all these things that we added. Okay, so that shows you a little bit how to actually write some code in IntelliJ IDEA, how it uses some of the features for templates, getting advantage of the REST controller, etc. And now to hand it back to Sandra, who's going to show us what we always have to do with an application, right? Which is essentially deliver it to the customer. Sandra? We can't hear you. I think you're muted.
Great, thank you. Thank you. So yeah, so I'm back to the Pet Clinic application. And as always, we talked about that we're going to do an end-to-end scenario. So let that push somewhere, let it deploy somewhere. And as it's not in a container yet, let's see what other options we have. So here I am connected to Azure. So you can use any cloud of your choice, obviously, but here I have the Azure Azure tools installed, so the Azure extension added, as well as the Azure Spring Cloud extension added. And here I can easily deploy to app service, just creating a new app instance, or I just use something I've already used before and then just right click and deploy my application. No, it's not here, so it's this one. So I go with this button and then I can choose my application, add the configuration, and then go ahead. So create a new web app, enter the name. So it's Hello Spring 1. Or Hello Springy. That should be there. Select the runtime stack and then the free tier and let that be deployed. Or I go with the most famous Azure Spring Cloud. So our deployment solution for Spring Cloud. Here I have the Plat Clinic instance and I can just right click and choose deploy and then choose my jar file, which I can easily generate with Maven install, for instance, and then click on select and deploy this application as well. Once it is deployed, I can click on my Pet Clinic instance and access the public endpoint. So there we go. See. Yeah, I am still on localhost, but with the URL, I'm copy pasting from my other window. So I am a bit confused with all the windows. Here I am inside the cloud, inside the Azure cloud, running on. Now it's temporarily unavailable because we are updating the deployment because I clicked on deploy. So it's updating, but very soon it will come back and then I can actually work with this one. And here I also want to show something because I also connected this one to MongoDB and I can easily do that with the service binding inside the Azure Spring Cloud portal, or I just do this via environment variables. And here I'm doing it with the environment variables. So I'm having the MySQL password, the URL, the user. I can actually also view them from here and also change them from here. So I don't need to go inside the portal to do so, which is very cool. So the Pet Clinic is still deploying. And for app service, we saw that we can use the applications or the, like using Tomcat or Java SE as the background, or even JBoss. But I could also deploy it inside a container and by just using Docker. So this one, yes, I want to go with the reverse space. So this one is now running a pre-deploy task, the package job for the Spring Pet Clinic. And here is my updating deployment for Azure Spring Cloud. I mean, usually you don't deploy in 2 ways at the same time, but for this showcasing, why not, right? So that one should be here very, very soon. Yeah, there we go. There it is back. So I can just try to find my owners again. Great. And I could actually not only find owners, but also add a new owner. Why don't we add a new owner and call it Hello Spring 1, living in street 123, name and telephone number as well. And add the owner right here. And then let's containerize this and then go back to Hadi. So first, why don't we Dockerize? I mean, we can't talk about Spring and all the other cool buzzwords without using containers and Docker as well. So I want to hand it over first to Martin and then to Hadi again. Thank you.
Okay, so as Sandra mentioned, Docker containerizes Spring Boot. Spring Boot has support to directly build a container image from your Spring Boot project. You might be familiar with that. Run Maven Spring Boot -build image, and then you get a container image. We have added some nice little integration into the tools here that makes it a little bit easier. So I can just add a Docker target for my locally running Docker agent to my boot dashboard. And then I can just drag and drop or click deploy. In this case, I say debug this on my Docker. So what happens behind the scenes and what you see in the log output is that it actually runs the Maven build for Spring Boot, regular Spring Boot Maven plugin, creating the container image, using the Paketo build packs behind the scenes to create this container image. And as a second step, once the image is being built, it creates a container to run this image on your local Docker. The nice thing about that is it does that without any additional interaction for myself, without any additional configuration that I need. And it automatically connects my debugger to that. So what I can see here is the project, the image that's being built, and the container that is running. So I could kind of double click and try it out with just one click. So that is nice. But since I started this in debug mode in Docker, I could, for example, go ahead and say, where is my welcome controller? Let's say here, create a breakpoint, click this again, and directly jump to the debug view inside of Eclipse. So you see it's all wired up for you, even though the app is running inside of the container. And my app is configured to use Spring Boot DevTools. You might have heard about that before, kind of an additional module that you can add. And even that is now connected to the Docker container. So when I change my app inside of the IDE, it would update the app running inside of this container. So I can see how the app behaves inside this containerized environment, debug it, change it without any kind of additional configuration, additional interaction, additional worries about how should I actually run this and going to the command line and do everything yourself and set everything up yourself. It's kind of, it happens automatically behind the scenes. So with that, we have containerized stuff. We deploy things to Azure, as Sandra showed us. Hadi, want to take it from here and show us more about the Azure deployment?
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to just give you a brief overview of what happens once it's deployed. Now, Sandra has been kind enough to give me access to her instance of the deployment, and I promised I wouldn't touch anything. Don't look at those weird things that I've added to the database, Sandra. But anyway, so you can see that here in my database tool window in IntelliJ IDEA, I also have Azure, right? So I can easily connect to the Azure instance. I can query it, and it's essentially just same as if I was just working locally, right? So we can see that this last one is Hello Spring 1, which Sandra, I assume you just added right now. And then if I click on the Spring Cloud tool in the Azure Explorer, which gives access to all the services, I can see the instance that has been deployed. So I can say access public endpoint streaming log. Let's click on the streaming log, and that should open. Well, it should start the streaming log, and then you can hit the tool window here to access the actual streaming log. So you can see that this is essentially showing you the log from the instance that you've deployed in Azure. So if I go ahead now here and say access public endpoint, and I see my instance there, and I can say, for instance, find owner, add owner, and we say Hadi Hariri address somewhere only we know. And add owner, we can see that the log is, well, supposedly should be updating. Oh, numeric value, 555. There you go. Watch way too many movies there. 555, 555. Add owner. There you go. So we can see that log is scrolling. It's showing me all of the output. And if I come to my database, refresh, I should be able to see a new instance. There you go. That is added. So the great thing is that, of course, you know, from inside IntelliJ, it doesn't matter whether you're deploying locally or you're deploying to a cloud, you basically are getting the same experience. And I couldn't finish, honestly, Sandra and Martin, because it feels awkward to be talking about IntelliJ, talking about Spring without Josh. Right? I can't see Josh. I can't see anybody in the audience. Well, I can't even see the audience. So I've come up with the best next thing, right? If I go, this is what I'm going to be doing next time I do this talk, so that Josh always kind of like keeps me company. There we go. We're going to find Josh, put him over here, and if all goes well, we now have Josh in the background overlooking everything I do. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Hadi. So this is kind of wrapping up the session, more or less. We have a few slides with resources. So we showed you kind of basically three different things. One is the Spring tools distribution for Eclipse, so the Eclipse-based Spring tooling that you get from spring.io/tools. That's open source and free to use. Hadi, want to say a few words about the IntelliJ idea? Things. There are also questions in the Slack about which version do I need to get the Springy tooling. Maybe you can highlight that.
I love how you say springy. I love that springy thing. Yes, so the obviously IntelliJ IDEA has a free open source community edition, which doesn't provide the support for Spring tooling. But the ultimate edition is the one that you will get all of the Spring tooling support for, as well as all of the database support, etc. So it would be the ultimate edition. And as you point out on the slides, it's available on a monthly or yearly subscription. And if you're doing open source or education or many other ways, you can get free licenses for that.
Sandra, want to talk to Visual Studio Code?
Yeah, Visual Studio Code is all free, so you can just use it. You should have the Java extension pack installed as well as the Spring extension pack. And if you use a cloud, you obviously also need the cloud tooling and support for this one. Yeah, so that's it for me. Let's have another question up. So
there was also one question about how does it kind of the Spring tools and the VS Code tools, the Spring tools for Eclipse and VS Code, they're kind of sort of similar, and IntelliJ is slightly different. So there is indeed a piece of the Spring tooling that is shared across Visual Studio Code as part of the Spring extension pack and the Eclipse distribution for Spring. But it's only a part of that tooling. So specific pieces are very, very similar, or kind of going back to the same code and the same language server behind the scenes. And parts, especially the UI parts, are slightly different. So you will see a different wizard, for example, for start.spring.io in VS Code, then you would see that in Eclipse, which is basically, the reason for that is basically the UI interaction and the whole ideas behind the IDEs are different. So the tools adopt kind of the user flow and the idea how to offer tools and how to interact with these tools and try to fit nicely in that. Therefore, it would not make sense to have kind of a highly wizardy-like UI showing up in VS Code. That would feel totally alien. So that's why sometimes it's very similar, sometimes it's slightly different. And IntelliJ has also kind of different tooling, but of course aims at the same goal, making you more productive. Sandra, you wanted to talk more about some questions?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I have a question from our chat, but I do have one for Eclipse. So I used it in university. So like 5 years ago, and actually like 8 years ago, I almost stopped using Eclipse because it wasn't very stable and it doesn't seem to, for me as a developer, the right tool to use. But now I followed your demo and it looks very impressive. How did that happen? And when did I miss that?
I think in the history of Eclipse, there was kind of there was a huge popularity at the beginning and a very kind of stable version, and then stuff changed on the platform level of Eclipse, and then there was indeed a time where it got unstable and a little bit buggy and slower. There was around the time when these Eclipse version 4.0, 4.1, 4.2, maybe up to 4.5, 4.6 appeared. And then it really went up again and got a lot more stable. It's supporting the latest Java versions all the time. And now, as you can see from, it's kind of 4.0 to 4.5 maybe, and now we are at 4.20. So quite a number of versions happened, releases happened in between. So I think it's up to a really good level now, thanks to the hard work of many people from the community, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I work then at an organization and then I expect my company to pay for proper license and then I move towards IntelliJ. But yeah, it feels like Eclipse can be a solution for you if you don't have the money, or if you're in the early career, if Visual Studio Code is not enough for you. Because me personally, I open up almost everything first in VS Code and then switch if it's not enough. I'm not sure, am I the only one who's using different IDEs, or is it maybe just me who can't decide?
There was one question about the IntelliJ while you were showing your demo, Hardy. One question from Justin on the Slack channel: is the sequel to create the adoptions table available somewhere within IntelliJ?
Yes, so that was actually a DDL, data definition language, file that I had in IntelliJ IDEA. And essentially what I did was just open the file and say run. And then it ran it inside IntelliJ IDEA and created the database. But it's just just a table that I added to Pet Clinic. I mean, it's not in the actual source code of Pet Clinic. It is on my repository, my version of Pet Clinic, which is Kotlin. No, I mean, my Pet Clinic is Java, but that file is Kotlin.
And maybe one more question for IntelliJ, is that okay?
Yes, sure.
Tara is asking, in IntelliJ, can I view the log of a Spring Boot application deployed in Kubernetes on AWS? And if so, how?
I believe, I believe you can, because there's an AWS toolkit as well. But don't quote me on that. If you want, follow up with me later on, and I will get you a 100% response. I think the next slide, actually, Martin, you have our contact details, right? Yeah, if you can reach me, or you can reach me at Hadi, Hadi at jetbrains.com, and I'll follow up with you on that.
Yeah, so the logs are all inside the plugins of the cloud vendors. So I'm aware, or I know that the Azure logs comes from the Azure tooling plugin. So it must be in the AWS plugin as well.
Yeah, I mean, there is AWS toolkit, which the AWS folks have created. So I guess that there is access to logs, but I would need to make sure.
Yeah, thank you.
People love your Josh background, Hadi.
It's awesome, isn't it?
I love it too. So
I wish you would have edited earlier.
I didn't, in case I messed something up. I wouldn't want him to be embarrassed, right? So I added it afterwards.
So I think with that, we can wrap it up. Please, if you have further questions, feel free to jump on the Q&A session that we are all on afterwards. With that, from my side, thanks for joining. Hope you enjoyed this session and getting a nice overview about the different tooling support and the different IDEs. So whatever you prefer, pick the IDE of your choice and get awesome Spring tooling inside of your preferred IDE. If you have further feedback, contact us on Twitter. Much appreciated to hear from you about what is working, what is not working, additional questions, feature requests, enhancement requests, anything, basically. It's all welcome. And thanks for watching.
Hey, Hadi, Martin, Sandra, thank you so much for your presentation. I'm like, oh man, I'm like, which one to use? They all have such fantastic features. So folks, if you have any additional questions, like Martin said, please join in the Zoom chat and feel free to ask them questions, learn, that little bit of extra more information about what tooling is available and where, and which one kind of gives you makes you feel most productive. With that being said, our next talk, which is going to be brought to you by Jonathan and Martine, is going to be on tracing issues with your tracing issues in your application, and that will start right at 1:05 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you. Look forward to seeing you.